Hi, and welcome to another episode of Better Minneapolis. Today, I'm interviewing Francis Shen, who's running for Hennepin County Prosecutor. Hello.
Hi, good morning. Nice to see you, Terry.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit before the recording. We'll kind of treat this like a regular interview, and then at the end, we'll talk about your statement about what happened yesterday. Um, so. Maybe you could start by just giving listeners an overview of your background and why you chose to run for this office.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here and to talk a little bit about why I'm running and who I am. My name's Francis. I was born and raised downriver in St. Louis, Missouri, and gateway to the West. Went to Jesuit high school, Catholic, still teach Sunday school,
Okay, I'm
and
sorry. I hate to interrupt you. So I went to school in Kansas City, Jesuit school called
Rockhurst.
Rockhurst.
Yes.
Um, is it St. Regis? Is that where you went to high
We're
school in Kansas?
St. Louis University High School, so
Okay,
the high school attached to the university. Yeah,
right.
oldest school west of the Mississippi, 1818. So
All right. Well, so
drilled it in my
the
head.
Jesuits do a good job with education, so you got that basic down.
I
Sorry to
was named
interrupt you.
Francis Xavier. My parents met in a Catholic faith sharing group. It's in the blood. Actually, interestingly enough, Catholic heritage on my Chinese side. My father was born in Shanghai. They escaped the communists to come to the U.S. And then Irish Catholic. My grandfather on the other side grew up in the Irish ghetto in St. Louis called the Kerry Patch. Yeah, my mom was first in her family to go to college. I went off to college at University of Chicago, ran track and field there, and then did a JD and PhD at Harvard, and always thought I'd go back to St. Louis. I took the bar exam in Missouri and thought I'd go back and be a prosecutor there. Life changed for two reasons. I met my wife, now wife, and the second thing that happened was that I was introduced to brain science, and that happened in graduate school, both of those things. So rather than come back to St. Louis, I went to Santa Barbara, California, of all places, to join something called the MacArthur Foundation Law and Neuroscience Project. And it was there where I began to work with judges, lawyers, law professors, neuroscientists to help create this new field of neuroscience and law. And that's what brought me here to Minnesota. In 2012, I was recruited to join the University of Minnesota in the law school. I'm also now a faculty member in the graduate program in neuroscience. And I run a lab there called the NeuroLaw Lab. And our motto is every story is a brain story. And the basic idea, and actually one of the reasons I'm running, is that law is in the business of governing human behavior. We get especially interested when that human behavior causes harm, either for the individual or for others in the community. And if neuroscience and related fields can help us understand why that harm occurred, why those bad decisions were made, it gives the law a better chance to help to intervene and make sure that it's less likely to happen again. So that's a little bit about my background. One other relevant piece that I'll just mention is I taught the schools at the University of Minnesota's first law and AI class. That was all the way back in 2017. And we've been working in that space around AI ethics for many years. And the recent emergence of AI kind of in the public sphere and certainly in the law, I think is actually a big part of this race and a big part of all law going forward. So that's a little about me. Where does this fit in? Why am I running for office? Um, the typical path to running for county attorney is to come up through the ranks, either through the ranks of being a prosecutor. Some of the others in this race have done that, or on the race may come up on the other side. Our current county attorney came up the ranks as a public defender. I am an innovator, not a litigator, and the reason I'm running is that I think all of the folks who come with experience in the system are basically going to deliver the same system with a few tweaks. Now, they're different tweaks. Some want to tweak it this way, some want to tweak it that way. But I look at the system that we have in 2025. It looks to me remarkably similar to the system we had in 2020, remarkably similar to the system we had in 2016, and going on back for decades. We're 25 years into the 21st century, and I think it's time. What I say is that the system isn't broken, it's obsolete, and we need a full system reset. So I offer the voters in this cycle an alternative. It's like there are a lot of litigators and a lot of ways to tweak the system. But if you think that we really need a different system altogether, then that's why I'm running, and happy to talk more about that.
So I would interpret that to mean that you feel like we need a new system, right? That's part of why you chose to run. Sounds like you're looking to update our thinking about prosecution and the law. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. And one of the primary reasons that I'm running is lawlessness. So there's got to be rule of law. The basic, to me, justice equation is catch the bad guys, intervene with the bad guys. Almost all of them are going back out into community. There are very rare life sentences. So while they're in the system, what can the county attorney's office do to ensure that when they go back into community, they're going to be productive members of community and not going to do the things that brought them in the first place? That's the justice equation. And unfortunately, right now in Minneapolis, the very first part of that equation is broken beyond repair. I talk all the time about clearance rates, and clearance rates, for probably know this, but for your audience if they don't know it, basically I think you can think about it as a did we get the bad guy statistic. Overall, nationally, clearance rates have really declined. Nationally, in the 50s, clearance rates for homicide were about 90%. So he did really well. Most folks didn't get away with it. Today, those numbers hover around 50 to 60%. In Minneapolis, about 68% for homicide. And then the bottom drops out. So rape and robbery are around 20% clearance rates. You keep going down the list. By the time you get to the very bottom, auto theft is 1%. There's a headline from earlier this year, maybe it was last year, 100 cars stolen in one weekend, no arrest made. That is lawlessness. And the rest of the system, the equation doesn't work when you can't catch the bad guys. And I've got some ideas and strategies for trying to do better. But yeah, that to me is a broken system. That's not a tweak. It's not like, oh, we're doing pretty well, we can get a little better. That's the entire equation is missing its key component.
I think the Minneapolis City Council has passed some new funding to get civilian investigators to help with those clearance rates. Is that something that you support or have any ideas around uh, these ways to address those clearance rates?
Yeah, additional investigators are important. And of course, some of this is outside the purview of the county attorney's office. I recognize that. But I'll say this, in the report from which I grabbed those statistics, is the 2024 report from Minneapolis. They noted sort of all these barriers, and there are different challenges to clearance rates. Some of them you have no control over. The weather was listed as one. Sometimes it just gets in the way of an investigation. They did talk about staffing issues, so certainly bulking up investigation can help. But they noted two things in addition that are relevant and things that county attorney's office can play a role in. One was public support from elected officials for law enforcement. There is a major trust that needs to be restored between the prosecutor's office, public defender's office, community, and law enforcement, local law enforcement. All of those groups and related community groups need to be on the same page, especially law enforcement or prosecutors. We are part of the same team. And yet, what I'm hearing from across the county in Minneapolis is that those relationships are really frayed. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
And the second is they mentioned technological advances. And I'll give you an example. This is why AI is so important. Let's say somebody parks their car 8 o'clock at night, they go to sleep, they wake up, the car is gone. That's not an uncommon occurrence, unfortunately. Right now, an investigator, a human investigator, has to sit with what's that, 12, 13 hours of video. We got Ring video, we got the security cameras to figure out, well, when exactly did somebody show up? And if they show up, oh, that's tailor-made for, AI video analysis. A human's still in the loop, human still has to be in it, but it's an example where we can, at the margins, improve clearance rates and just improve the functioning of justice. And I'll say that all of this is a scale problem. The reason we have those poor clearance rates is not because these are, expert thieves who are stealing paintings from the Louvre. It's just that there's not enough time and resources to go after so-called lower level crimes. I think they're actually really important. I don't want to denigrate them because there are other crimes that are happening. So you've got to do this at scale, and you've got to do it under resource constraints. Those are difficult things to do, but surely we can do better than 99% of the folks who steal a car aren't getting any discipline or any intervention from it. And I'll find just one final point on that. Whether you want to rehabilitate or you want to punish or some combination of both, you have to bring that person in the system. You have to have a touch point.
So I think if you maybe you've heard this from the police. I mean, the reason they uh, don't spend as much time on those what I don't know if you want to call them lower level crimes, but property crimes, non-violent crimes, is because they're so focused on the violent crime, and they would say they don't have enough officers. And again, that kind of gets to your um, point about having support from the public is, do we need more officers or do we need more policing alternatives? So, I mean, that's a constant sort of point of contention in the city, it feels like. One thing I did want to ask about, I heard it that there's apparently 38 different law agencies in Hennepin County, and that does seem like a difficult, uh, I don't know, a large group of people for you to get to know and to have a relationship with. And um, how do you see yourself being able to do that with such kind of a sprawling group of agencies out there?
It's a great question, and I do think that we too often think of Hennepin County as just Minneapolis, when in fact there are those many law enforcement agencies in 45 cities. Minneapolis is one of them. So I think there are a couple of concrete things you do. One is you show up in those spaces regularly, and I would hope that every county attorney candidate would pledge to do that. Certainly, I will. Whether it's St. Bonifacius or Champlin or Dayton or Rogers, Independence, anywhere, they have an equal say in the way that this county works. A second is that one thing I've heard from some of the law enforcement leaders outside of Minneapolis is that they're getting too many declining to prosecute cases. And I think that's actually part of the scale problem. When Minneapolis cases and sort of the time required to deal with Minneapolis politics swamps too much time from the office, then the downstream effects of that are less time and attention paid to the other cities, whether the suburbs or more rural parts of the county. So that's part of the scale issue. And then the third thing is that I think there just needs to be a recognition that law enforcement anywhere in the county is supported by this office. I have heard from multiple leaders of agencies that some of their police officers are now concerned about their own policing for fear that their own county attorney is going to potentially be looking over the back, be prosecuting them, be coming after them. And I think that's really challenging. They already have it challenging enough. We already talked about the staffing issues. Every minute, every hour that they're thinking about what someone on their own team might do to them, that's not time that they're spent on, addressing, as mentioned, either clearance rates, working with victims, or anything else that's in their purview.
So, what would you say are your three main priorities if you were to be elected?
Yeah, we've touched on the first one, which is improving relation. It's a combination of improving relationships with law enforcement in order to reduce clearance rates. And in particular, and I wrote a Star Tribune op-ed about this earlier in the year, I'm a big fan of focused deterrence as a strategy. It's worked here actually in the metro area before. It's worked in a number of other areas. And the basic insight, this is a data insight, is that a large percentage of the offenses, the serious offenses, the violent offenses, are carried out in a small number of blocks, relatively small number of blocks, by a relatively small number of people.
Mhm.
Almost everyone in Hennepin County is a law-abiding citizen. Okay? That's what we start with that, but some are not. So you focus your limited resources. It's a resource allocation question. It's a management question. You help and you work with law enforcement to focus your limited resources where it's needed the most. The phrase I like is stop the bleeding, and that's borrowing from Thomas Abt, who runs a nonpartisan criminal justice violence reduction center. Stop the bleeding. The analogy is to emergency rooms. When somebody gets in the emergency room, you can have the downstream conversations about all sorts of other things. The first thing you do is stop the bleeding. So I'd focus on that, and that's three-part process. You focus, we just talked about. then you have a balanced approach. First, carrot, then stick. Carrot might be put people in a room. Here are off ramps to violence. Here's the mental health treatment. Here's this, here's that. But if you don't take those off ramps, then comes the stick, and that's significant prosecution. And then fairness. It's got to be fair because you've got to have community trust. So that's priority number one for me.
I think you might run into some criticism with that of targeting specific racial groups, or especially if you're looking at going into, um, certain zip codes or areas that might be dominated by specific racial groups. I mean, how would you deal with that kind of criticism?
Yeah, it's a fair question. So first of all, we take race out of the equation. So none of the focusing we don't want to ask about race or ethnicity or gender. We do focus on geography.
Hmm.
And I think the answer is, and it's our branded is safety. I want to optimize safety. That's the thing that I care about most. And it is true that we're not going to be in every zip code the same way in the county. But to me, there's a fair reason to do that. And I use a lot of sports analogies. A sports analogy I would use is, not everyone plays the same in a game. There are different ways to coach, right? Some coach, you say, oh, everyone's going to play the same amount in a game. And, that's appropriate when really young ages. But when you're talking about the pros or even high school, it's fair for some to play and some not to play. And I think it is fair in this case to target resources at those places where they're needed most. But I will add that it is really important that it's not just stick, it's carrot and stick. So that's important. And the final thing I'll add is that the victims of these crimes are also disproportionately in those geographies. And I think it's unfair not to bring those resources to bear because what are we saying to those victims who are in those spaces?
Right. Okay. So number one, focus deterrent. Number two, priority.
Yeah. Number two is the use of artificial intelligence. This is the first wave of law practice, whether it's a county attorney or big law or small firms that are really about to deal with artificial intelligence. I mentioned before that I taught our state's first law and AI class a number of years ago. At that point, I remember asking the students, does anyone in this building have any idea how big this is going to be? And I was like, no, they don't. And now it is. It's big. So even 5 years ago in the last election, you didn't need a county attorney who had any experience in ethical governance of AI. It just wasn't a thing. The question now is not, will the office use AI? By the way, they already are. Every county attorney's office is, every public defender is, every lawyer is starting to do it. The question is, how will it be used? Will it be used effectively? Will it be used ethically? Here, there are some real serious concerns about bias in the models and leading to disparate outcomes. But there are also some amazing opportunities. And one of the things, Terry, that I have become really aware of as I've gotten into this race is there's no cavalry coming in terms of additional resources. We're not going to have, like 200 more prosecutors. It's already in office with 500 people now. They're not all prosecutors, staff, and the like. Budget of 80, 90 million. So you've got budget constraints. You've got staffing constraints. Like any other firm, the question is, how do you maximize, optimize those resources? Every other sector right now, actually many are really rapidly moving into this, are figuring out how do we utilize AI and how to utilize appropriate. I'm actually surprised that I'm the only candidate hammering it this much because I really think it's that important. I'll give you a concrete example where it's already happening right in our county, I think in a good way. This is out in South Lake, Minnetonka, the police department there, Sergeant Adam Moore, and I saw him present this amazing work they're doing. They have an AI system. It's called AccuSensus. And what it does, it's a Highway 7. People are going 50, 60 miles per hour. And amazingly, there are people holding their cell phones looking down like this while 50 miles per hour. If you're just an officer, you can see some of them, but this system allows them what it does is it takes pictures, it quickly identifies, is this someone you should pull over? It sends a text to the officer. Within 20 seconds, they can pull that car over. And most of them, they get warnings and then they don't do it again. That is saving lives. It's saving harm. It's a really effective use of AI. There are also some really problematic uses of AI. For example, we just talked about race. There are ways that, if it were used in sentencing without careful guidance, you could get some really, really nasty results. So that's the second thing. I think it's legal malpractice not to be focusing heavily on AI. And I'd say that for, again, I hope every county attorney is talking about it. I think I seem to be the only candidate. So that's the second thing. And
I suppose I've mostly heard about it in like not necessarily in Minnesota, but other places where briefs have been filed that have been written by AI that have had mistakes and whatnot in them. I'm sure that even that will resolve itself, and there's plenty of other uses like the example that you just gave, um, analyzing speed, what people are doing in their cars. Um, it is a little frightening. It does seem a little big brotherish, right? Like letting this computer kind of modify our behavior. But
it absolutely has the potential to be Big Brother, which is all the more reason that you've got to have someone in there who's been, it's what I do. Is the last 8 years, we developed guidance for these sorts of things and transparency and something called ethical and trustworthy AI. So there are systems in place to do that. You're right. You mentioned brief writing. It's already actually in the county budget. You can read it. It's there. They're already purchasing technology to allow their attorneys to utilize AI to help write briefs. The police officers have systems that are potentially allowing them to maybe use it to help write police reports. And again, this stuff is going to come, and there are some really lazy ways that it could come. Oh, hey, instead of writing my brief report, I can just press a button. It'll get written for me. But then you get what you referenced, those hallucinations, where we've had cases, examples where the brief cites to a case that doesn't exist. It's totally made up by the AI system. So how do you address that? Well, you address it through really careful training. You don't address it, in my mind, by saying, oh, we're going to put our head in the sand and not use AI, because you will lose. Defense is doing that. If prosecution isn't doing it also, you'll lose in this adversarial system. So we've got to embrace it, but we've got to do it ethically. And again, that's a skill set that I have that others don't, and that you just frankly didn't need up until up until this election. You just did not need that skill set, and now you do.
you know, one thing I will mention about the resources that you talked about, it was kind of a controversial move, I guess, that Moriarty brought in, I guess what you call like an outside law firm and spent a bunch of money on one of the prosecutions. Is Are there scenarios where you see that as being the correct choice to bring in and hire outside law firms to help with cases?
I do not think that should be a norm. No, I mean, we have so many amazing, talented people right here in the state. I know because I teach them and we send them into the workforce.
Yeah.
And I just know the people in that office are fantastic as well. So, no, I think you source locally. And if anything, actually, what I think we can do more of is recruit nationally to come work in a place that will be the most innovative county attorney's office in the country. I mean, some of these issues are first of their kind, and
Yeah.
so I want people saying, too often I think we'll say, oh, I think there's New York's done it well, or Houston. People should be saying, I think that Hennepin County, they're the one. Oh, yeah, we should use the Hennepin County model. Yeah, we should Hennepin. That's what we should be, and we can be. I mean, I know we totally can be, and we are in so many areas. I mean, we're medical device leaders. We're this and that. We've got more Fortune 500 companies here, right, than anywhere I think per capita. So I just see us as an innovation hub. But no, we don't need. I've spent a lot of time on those coast. We can do just fine by ourselves.
Well, I have a couple more questions for you, but I want to make sure if there's other priorities that you wanted to mention that I give you a chance to do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the last one, which is actually what I've been doing for the last 15 years, and that's trying to apply lessons and tools from neuroscience in the legal
Hmm.
system. And the basic idea is that, as I mentioned at the outset, the more we can ask and reliably answer, why did you do the thing you did? We got a much better chance at responding and make sure you don't do it again. I want to fight a war on addiction, not a war on drugs. Addiction is just one of many examples where better understanding, and now we have much better tools for treating it, can really reduce not just cost, improve justice, help victims. Making sure victims are a big part of this is also something that's important to me. And I think we can do a much better job from the very first moment that their alleged assailant shows up in the system to the very end and making sure that victims have a voice in how we prosecute. But just to put in a concrete example on the neuroscience, and I'll use that example of addiction, the sentencing guidelines really guide a lot of what happens across the state, including in this county. For readers who don't know, sentencing guidelines were put in place to take the individual out of the equation. And the reason was there were disparities by race because every judge was maybe sentencing a little bit different. And it turned out that there were these disparities. So understandably, folks got together. Minnesota was actually the first in the nation to lead the guidelines movement. And they said, okay, we're going to think about only two things: prior record. So how many bad things have you done before? And current harm. How bad was this crime? And it's an actual grid that every attorney knows in the state. And you find where you are in the box, and there's a little range, and you're somewhere in the range. You can depart from it, go up, but basically that's how it works. I think that's obsolete. Why do I think it's obsolete? Because I think we need to ask individualization questions. And first time DUI are a great example. First time DUI, if nobody gets hurt, it's a Tuesday night, somebody's driving drunk, they get pulled over, they get picked up, they're brought in. Okay. There's just a standard approach that happens. It's pretty light, maybe a bit of a suspended sentence, few other things, fine. We never ask. There's no real incentive, that system, to ask, why were you driving drunk? Was it just a dumb decision? Or is this just the first time you're caught and you've got a significant substance use disorder? The kicker is that, and they are piloting it in Hennepin County in one courtroom, which is fantastic, and up in Duluth, there are 15-minute screeners that can be used to help separate. And this is a group called All Rise. They describe it as separating the 1/3 from the 2/3. And you sort of the 1/3 of folks who were driving drunk really because they've got an addiction that needs to be treated, versus the 2/3 who, yeah, just dumb move and standard approach is fine. We need to be doing that at scale. We need to be doing that for many more folks to help figure out, why'd you do this? Are you evil? Do you think there's evil in the world? Were you just stupid? Are you sick? Are you desperate? Like what is the reason? And then we can begin to intervene much more smartly. So it's not harder on crime, softer on crime. It's just being smarter and more precise on crime. And I just think our system really doesn't do that. And I would say by design, those guidelines are really focused on one view of what fairness is. And I take a different view about fairness. And I'm okay with the fact that, yeah, some individuals who've done the same thing, like driving drunk on Tuesday, are going to get a really different outcome. Why? Because they did it for different reasons. And if you give them the same outcome, you're going to put some of those drunk folks right back on the street. Last thing I'll say is there was a gentleman who was arrested earlier this year for his 22nd DUI in Hennepin County. I kid you not, 22 in a row. That's not just a mistake here or there. That's a system failure if we can't figure out how to keep that man either off the roads or to get him the treatment he needs. Like I said, off ramp first, but if there's no off ramp, that man should never drive in Hennepin County again.
Yeah, I would think, and maybe they had some jail time. I don't know how it all works, but it seems like they shouldn't have a license and had done some jail time. Had that occurred or not? Do you know?
Yeah, there's been incarceration, but here's
Okay.
the thing, but without using that time of incarceration productively, right
Right.
back out, right? And that's what I mean about being smart about when somebody's with us. I mean, with us, I don't mean they're in a hotel with us. They're incarcerated and us being the justice system. But that doesn't mean we can't be doing interventions. And I think for many it would work. Not all. There's some folks who are, for a variety of reasons, wired to keep doing this stuff, and those you gotta treat differently. But most, I think, if you can figure out, why they're doing the things they are, we can do better. Not for everyone. It's not going to be perfect, but I just look at our numbers and I think, and there's so much room for significant improvement. And again, I just look at the system design. It's like, well, yeah, of course we're not doing it because it's not designed to ask those questions. It's not really designed to produce the outcomes that I think it can.
As part of that design, it seems like we're talking about adults. And I would say part of the criticism of Moriarty is that people feel like she's been too lenient on children. And I don't know that we have a system that's designed well to deal with, say, a 13-year-old that's stolen cars 10 times, right? So what's your, and this is where I find your kind of brain science approach interesting because there's a lot of evidence behind like a child's brain, especially a male up to what, like 25, their brain is still developing. It's different than, say, how you handle uh, a 35-year-old who's committed a crime. So, what would your approach be in handling a lot of this youth crime that we're seeing? And once, let's say they are arrested, what should happen to them? Because Hennepin County has shut down some of their youth detention facilities, right? So there's also kind of a lack of um, places to even put youth if you do arrest them. But this has been a big issue in Hennepin County and a big debate, and I'm very curious, like how you would go about treating um, youth offenders.
Yeah, so there's some things I think I do similarly and some things differently than current county attorney. Um, I'll start with the things that I think are actually going pretty well. There have been some reductions through early intervention, and I'm a big fan of early and often intervention and swift, certain, and fair intervention. There's good evidence, behavioral evidence, neuroscience evidence for a long time that what deters anyone, including youth, is not the amount of the penalty at the end, but the likelihood of getting caught at the beginning. And this is, it would lead to more, again, early intervention. And I think actually the county attorney, though maybe we don't see that in the headlines as much as some of the other stuff, has done a good job of trying to do that and would continue to do that. Where I differ is, and where the, well, let me say the second thing where I think it's also appropriate. So, developmentally appropriate interventions are really what neuroscience consoles. You've, I think, cited already some good research. And actually, it goes beyond 25. Our brains continue to develop for some time, but it goes back to individualization. And here's where I differ. Just because someone is 17 doesn't mean that their particular individual capacity for moral reasoning is necessarily different than a 30-year-old. On average, yes. 17-year-olds are a lot different than 30-year-olds. But pull any 30-year-old and one 17-year-old, and I would just say, think if whoever at, 30 was still basically acting like a teenager, and you think whoever was in your high school was like, yeah, they're wise beyond their years. Yeah, they're the adult in our group, right? So you have to get individualized. You can't rest on the group averages. When you get individualized, what I think you begin to find then is that each person is going to have a slightly different path. And some of those paths, and here's where I differ again, may involve punishment in ways that are not aimed at rehabilitation. Why? Because our sentencing guidelines and what I teach on day one of criminal law say that punishment, and I agree with this, is both a combination of thinking about rehabilitation, forward looking, like what can, as I've mentioned, what can we do to help you do better in the future? And that's better for everyone. But it's also backward looking because a crime is a moral transgression against the victim and against the community in which you and the victim live. And that's why getting to victims' voices and community input is so important. And it's especially important with neuroscience because neuroscience can't tell us yet at a individual level exactly what was happening in the brain of someone when they did the bad thing. For example, they walked back in a house and shot someone and killed them. And since neuroscience can't give us exactly the answer, it gives us some guidelines, which should be very relevant, but it can't give us all the answers. We can't sideline the views of victims and community, and that's an important part. And I think where County Attorney Moriarty has sort of run into some resistance, mostly has been in places where the community, again, these are community members who are, right in that same zip code, say, and this is what we want. This is what the community wants. And I think we are problematic if we let sort of elite science and neuroscience trump the views of community. What I would say often, though, they're aligned, where the community says, really what we want is for this not to happen again. Aha, now we're in great shape because now we're in great community, doesn't want this to happen again. And this for, somebody like a serious crime but say not a homicide like a carjacking. And actually, carjackings are down through early intervention. And kudos to Mary Moriarty for doing that. But someone comes in now, let's say they're 15 years old, more developmentally appropriate interventions. It's aligned with community views, it's aligned with the science, and it's aligned with the idea of discipline and punishment, accountability, responsibility. Last thing I'll say is neuroscience gives us a lot of insight about how to intervene, but it doesn't tell us anything about, all right, what if that individual doesn't want to go with you down that road? They're recalcitrant. They're refusing to take responsibility. They just don't show up for any of the mental health counseling that you've worked so hard to set up. Then I think that's a violation of the social compact, and I think more punishment is warranted, even though that punishment is not designed to rehabilitate them. It's designed to continue in this part of our system, respond to the social transgression that they made. So there are some places where I agree, and I give kudos to the county attorney for doing that. She's been working with emerging adults, so new emerging adult program. That's great. Love it. But I think there are limits to what neuroscience can do. And I spent 15 years thinking about those limits. So I think I'm in a pretty good position to talk about them.
I guess piece of the talking about is, so are the resources for where to say put youth, right? Because I feel like there's a lot of constraints in the state in terms of there's just not facilities for if you decide this individual needs more mental health, like there may not be a place to put them, or the jail may be filled or not even there. But I recognize that's not necessarily something you have control over, but it
Well,
seems like there's a system that isn't all going in the same direction, you know?
you're a county attorney like any elected official, or frankly, any servant, public school teacher who says, well, I wish my students were coming to school with, fuller bellies and more stable families and the like. But that's not an excuse, right? It's an explanation. It's a contextual factor. You may have to teach differently, but you've still got a responsibility to do the best you can with those kids in the classroom. And my view here is that the county attorney has a responsibility, recognizing all those resource constraints you named and more, to do the best we can with limited resources, which is why I am such and so bullish on optimization, on improved analytics at the individual level, not data that's sort of, broadly, but I mean specific about, okay, we've got 10 folks. We've got room for five to get services. Which five are going to get them? Okay. We should have some data. If we continue to collect it, begins to tell us, all right, this is the type of person who can do it. Or also maybe this individual has been in before. Let's make sure that we're tracking to see if they're able to, participate again. And as I said, to me, fairness is an individual question based on, those individual characteristics. Last thing I'll say on this is that we've been doing work for about 5 years around the idea of delivering mental health services digitally. It's not a replacement for in-person. And this is outside of the justice system, because forget criminal justice for a moment, it's difficult for anyone to get the mental health services they need. And there are a lot of reasons for that. One is that we deinstitutionalized. So in this state in 1950, there were 11,500 state psychiatric beds. There are now 192.
So wait, can you say that again?
Yep.
So I
Yep. So we
recognize
went
that.
from 11,500 state psychiatric beds. You had a serious or severe mental illness. Basically, you were in the state hospital.
Yeah,
Now we have 192. Where
that's
did those
amazing.
folks go? Now some
Yeah.
went, and the reason we deinstitutionalized, two reasons. One is the advent of drugs that were for the first time allowed for some care outside the community. The second was that a lot of those institutions were really problematic, and this was a
Mhm.
nationwide movement. It's kind of we're like the trend, but it's estimated by the experts that we need about 50 beds for 100,000 people. And we have 3 in this state for 100,000. So where do those folks go? Okay, some went to care facilities that are doing well. A lot became homeless, and a large number came into the criminal justice system. It's estimated by the same think tank that if you have a serious or severe mental illness in Minnesota, you are 15 times more likely to be in jail than in a mental health than in a state psychiatric bed.
Yeah.
So it goes to your question, because is the county attorney like the chief medical officer of the county? No. But in 2025, given that we do not have this thing called the non-criminal justice mental health system right now, you actually are the front lines for a lot of severe, serious mental illness. I want to emphasize that the link between mental illness and violence is often overstated. Almost everyone who has a serious, severe mental illness, they're not violent, but it is the case that it's also the case that many who are in the justice system are overrepresented by those with these serious mental disorders. So again, I come at this as someone who's worked in that space for a long time, and in particular, try to innovate. So I wanted to mention this digital psychiatry effort. Those who actually have lots and lots of means, probably some of the richest people in our county, are already doing that. Whether it's a smart ring or a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, they're already saying, hey, I bet I can use data to make my life healthier, to get feedback. Um, there are ways to do that in the justice system that really are only beginning to be piloted. I think they could be expanded. We can do it in a way that really respects the dignity of the human person. We can do it in a way that begins to sort of unclog some of the jails and the prisons, and we can do it in a way that can improve mental health. And it's just like it's sitting out there for Hennepin County to be the leader in, but we just don't think about it that way. Will it solve everything? No. Is it a replacement for human touch? No. But we've got to win at the margins, Terry. It's like we're a small market ball team. We're not the Yankees. We can't just buy our way out of this problem. We can't litigate our way out of this problem. And that's one of the margins that we could definitely take advantage of.
Well, I thought you were going to go was more like mental health talks like we're having right now. Where it's and when you said digital, I assumed you were going to talk about, say, a social worker or a therapist talking with someone through video, but it sounds like your view of it is a little bit more expansive than that.
Yeah, that's part of it too, but that's limited because there are only so many humans on the other side of the line. There are some real limits. So, for instance, AI chatbots in mental health care are really precarious right now. I would not suggest that. But our mode of just finding and keeping track of individuals is really challenging. And, you know, it can sound draconian to track, but I'll give an example of homelessness. We do have some amazing folks working on the challenge of homelessness. And one of the things that they do is rather than do a just a count, it used to be a way that you just I think it's January, February, you just count the number of people out and that gives you your data. What they found was much better was to actually count by name, to find the individuals and track those individuals. Track has a better, maybe a bad connotation. The better idea would just be touching base with individuals, and understanding where they are in the community. The science is neutral. The science isn't pro-prosecutor or pro-defense or pro-Republican or pro-Democrat. The science in these tools are neutral. The real question is, do we have the will to implement them and the sort of the skill and the know-how to do so ethically? Because they're also a mind trap. There is a real slippery slope for all of these things. And again, that's why you put in the ethical guardrails. But I just don't see any future. I think about, okay, 2030 will be when this next county attorney finishes their first term. And I ask myself, what will that county attorney's office look like? What will our prosecutor's office look like? I'm pretty sure it's not going to have more money. I'm pretty sure it's not going to have a ton more folks. Pretty sure we aren't going to have, 10,000 more state psychiatric beds. And I could list 100 other ways in which our resources are constrained. And I think the easy answer then is to say, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing. Let's blame resource constraints and let's get some tweaks and champion those tweaks. And I just don't think that's acceptable.
So I want to finish up with two final questions. You've mentioned a few times about having, say, victims of crime involved in sentencing or at least discussions around sentencing. Could you just explain that a little bit more? Because I think there is a whole movement around making sure that there's interaction between, say, the person who's committed the crime and the victim, and using that to, I guess, help determine the correct, whether it's punishment or service for that in that situation.
Yeah, so there are, I think, a number of ways that victims can become engaged. You're referencing, I think, restorative justice, which is an idea where, in some context, though not all, one of the ways to help come to a resolution that works for all and is productive for all is to actually bring together all parties in one way or another. I think that is appropriate in some spaces. One example actually would be, and it is an emphasis of mine, is elder justice and elder fraud. We overlook that way too much. And so I'm just going to mention at the end, I'm going to mention it now, where often the perpetrator of that fraud is someone that knows the victim. Could be, a grandchild, could be a child, could be a family member. And that older adult both doesn't want to get defrauded and needs restitution, but doesn't want to see their grandson go to jail. And that's a space where restorative justice might work well, also because kind of the players are known. There are other places where I just think it couldn't. And restorative justice can't be the answer because of the scale issue. So that county sees over 10,000 cases a year, and that's despite low clearance rates. So there's no way you're going to get, 10,000 cases, and restorative justice just can't work. I would like to, at scale and system-wide, put victims' voices into place, and here's how I want to do it. You have probably went to many companies where at the end of this call, stay on the line for a one-question survey. You can evaluate your customer service empirically. That's what the businesses do, and they then reward and sort of align resources accordingly. Like, who are our best customer service representatives? Who are the folks who are... we don't do that at scale. That's a one question. We could be at the end of each case, first of all, being in touch. Here's a quick 5-minute. Are we in touch with the victim? Did we ask them at the beginning on this? Now they're a witness, maybe, but were we in touch with them? What did they want? At the end of the resolution, did we keep them updated? Did we send an update if we can contact them? And finally, at the resolution, just one question survey, scale of 1 to 5. Are you happy with this resolution? I don't see that data right now. But if we had that, not only would it give us system-wide data, it would begin to create incentives. Got to create system incentives. Now, oh yeah, I better get my V score, right? My victim a score up, right? I would love to implement that. That's something we can implement. You can implement at scale because, again, it can be pretty automated. And it would be, look, at first we do it at a pilot version. Of course, you don't go from 0 to nothing. But I just don't see that type of thinking, because if we just say the platitudes of, I want to empower victims, like, oh, okay, what does that mean? And we do a good job with victim services when, the victim needs services. But I'm talking again about just those most residents of Minneapolis, most residents of Hennepin County, their interaction with the justice system is so small. I mean, here's what I hear most common is I called the police. They asked, is anybody in danger of being hurt? And I said no. And they said, go to the website and fill out a form, basically, right? I mean,
right. Yeah.
What kind of service is that? We're in the service industry, and our main service is to those who either don't feel safe or are not safe. And if you don't feel safe, I think you're not safe. So I think we need to be in the customer service business. I think victims are our primary citizens, but especially victims are our first customers. And we could do a much better job of that. And we could actually measure how we do. And we could hold ourselves accountable. So yeah, that's how I envision justice with victims.
Okay, well, thank you. And so final question, I wanted to make sure we haven't talked about the events of yesterday. Obviously, the shooting and the killing of the woman by ICE is a terrible event, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe give your statement on it, and if you feel like the county has some role in prosecuting here, or just what your thoughts are.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, I was at the corner of 34th and Portland shortly after the shooting, got word and went right over. ICE agents had left by that time. What I said, and this is, I'll just, quote from the statement that I put out on social media. I said that this was a tragedy, that Renee Good died after being shot. I think a major part of that tragedy is her 6-year-old son will never see his mother again. I think this happened because our federal government has chosen anger over compassion and recklessness over rule of law. I was really clear. I said laws must be enforced, but not like this. One thing I wanted to emphasize, and I mentioned this in the statement, is that to me, there's a big difference between federal ICE agents who, up until 2 weeks ago, had never stepped foot in this state, as compared to our local law enforcement. And I saw MPD and the sheriff's office doing fantastic work on the site. They, of course, had to maintain the perimeter for an ongoing crime scene investigation. I was there while they, investigating the car and everything. I even saw an MPD officer literally run to save a baby's life because it's totally separate. There was a baby who was choking. Um, these are really good folks, our local law enforcement, and so I would hope that anger and concern about ICE doesn't get in the way of the healing that's happening with our local law enforcement. I emphasized at the end, there were many chants going on, some of which I didn't like so much, but some which I did. And one was, whose streets, our streets, whose city, our city. And so I think the steps forward are really about our community coming together, our local communities coming together, and standing up for one another. With respect to prosecution, I did a rapid response conversation with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner on this question of what are the possible legal avenues. A reserve judgment on exactly what should happen because there's an ongoing investigation. I think we do need all the facts, but should there be, the facts amount to something that seems that this was unreasonable? It certainly seems like it may be, though we'll have to see. Then there are avenues for the state to move forward. It would get removed to federal court, and then there'd be an immunity hearing. So it'd be not a typical type of prosecution, but those machinations could start from the state and local level. But I think the most important thing now is for our community to come together. We've had a lot of challenges our last 5-6 years, and connecting it to what we've just said. And I actually spoke with Judge Gertner about this. I want to make sure that as difficult and as tragic as this is, we still keep our eyes on that system as a whole too, because and that's one of my main concerns with ICE is it becomes such a distraction now from all of these other challenges that we've just spent the last 45 minutes talking about. And now there's a new one on top of everything else. Is it kind of the last thing we needed? But I saw a lot of our community members really coming together. I thought that was great. As I mentioned, I at the start, I'm Catholic. I kind of followed the bishops on this one. We talk about recognizing the human dignity of all involved. That's both victims, but that's law enforcement as well. We're one community. I hope we can continue to see that.
Well, great. Thank you for taking the time. We really covered a lot of ground here. Is there any points that we missed that you wanted to talk about, or did we pretty much cover it all?
I think, Terry, you were great. We were able to cover it all. Folks can check out the website, shenforsafety.org for more, and track me down. I'll talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime, and I'm happy to have this forum. So thanks so much for doing this and for doing all the interviews.
You're welcome. And you mentioned that you put your statement on social media. What platform are you using, and what's your handle for that?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. My personal is FXSHEN. The X stands for Xavier, so FX Shen. And everywhere else, TikTok and Instagram, we're Shen for Safety, SHENFOR Safety. And our team helps old me get onto those newer
Well,
platforms.
you're on the cutting edge as far as I'm concerned, because I haven't gotten into the TikTok universe, although I guess maybe I should be. But all right, well, thank you, and
Okay, thanks, Terry.
have a good day.
You as well. Thank you so much.